Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this virtual professional development opportunity. My name is Joe Schmidt. I'm the Social Studies Specialist for the Maine Department of Education. Today, I am happy and excited to welcome Beth Ratway from the American Institute on Research to join us today. Beth is a senior analyst, I think if I got that correct this time, at AIR.
I just do things.
He does things very, very well. I know Beth back to, she used to be the social studies specialist for the Wisconsin Department of Instruction. Back when I started, she was in that position. She still serves in her capacity at AIR. She works with a couple of my national organizations, and we rely on Beth a lot for social studies and instruction and standards work. Beth is going to go ahead and talk not specifically about social studies, but just the bigger idea of how do you work through this current situation. I reached out to different people about supporting Maine educators, and Beth said, do you think there's a need to talk about how to overcome this gap in learning being gone? And I said, yes, absolutely. And so here we are. So I'd like to introduce to you Beth Ratway, who's going to go ahead and talk about minding the gap.
Thanks, Joe. We'll use the chat box, and you can ask questions and things. I don't know if I'll get the chance to answer them, but I will answer them eventually. I'm going to capture the chat box, and what I did, we just did one for elementary, and when I ask questions, I'm going to capture all of the information in the chat box. So I will share other resources. So this is just the beginning, just so you all know how this is going to work. It's hard to do, as you all know now, it's hard to do the presentation, do the chat, and do all the different things. I will be asking you to put some things in the chat, and I'll be paying attention then. Otherwise, we'll be getting to go through some of this information, getting it to you. And as Joe said, you will have all of this. I will send you a PowerPoint and some tools and resources in a Google folder right after, or Joe will. Thank you, Joe. Right after this presentation. The presentation has links in it, so you can use all of the links and you can access all of that. So you will get it within within the day, today or tomorrow, with access to all of this information. As Joe said, I'm from Wisconsin. I always work remotely, so this has not been that big of a shift, except I usually travel every week to different states and different districts, and so that has been a little quiet lately. I live right between Milwaukee and Madison, and I'm in the same boat as all of you, just trying to get along. I have an 18-year-old graduating this week from high school and going to the University of Wisconsin-Madison next year, so things are a little complicated. And I know everybody has a lot of things on their mind, and I really wanted to tell you thank you for coming to this. It will be recorded, so you can come back to it. You can share it with your colleagues, and we'll get started. I taught for 15 years in high school, right outside of Milwaukee. And then I went to be Joe at the Department of Public Instruction in Wisconsin. And then I came to the American Institutes for Research. So I've been at the American Institutes for Research for 10 years. A majority of my work is around standards, so all content standards. I help state departments of education bring teachers together to write standards, and then to support teachers in implementing those standards in their classrooms. So I work with districts, I work with state departments all across the United States around standards in all the content areas. So, and as well as SEL kind of competencies, early childhood. So I've played in a lot of different areas. My main sandbox obviously is social studies. That's what I taught. But I've been learning a lot with science, math, ELA, all the different areas right now in terms of trying to help people understand how to write standards and how to really choose what's really important for all kids. So that's really my background. I do some other work in career pathways as well, but it all combines into really helping people think about what's best for kids. The work here, I'll explain where it came from and my mindset in terms of doing that as we move forward. Let me go here. So in the chat box, I'd like you just to jot down your answer to the following question. Let's focus on what's going well. So over the last 2 months, what has gone well? Just jot down some thoughts. I'm going to capture this all later, but I'm going to take a peek while you're writing in there. What has gone well in the last 2 months of teaching? What's working? Phone contact? Oh, that's cool. Yeah. A lot of online resources. Whew. You had no choice then to be better at technology. Zoom office hours, I've heard that before too. Productive department meetings. Wow, I'll have to learn more about that. Google Classroom, we heard. Zoom classes, PD, good. All seniors graduated. That's an accomplishment. We have 5 days of graduation here right now, so it's been spread out. IEPs, yep, those are interesting conversations as well. Tracking who's getting work done and finding patterns and those types of things. This is great. Yeah, we all have to get better at technology. Guidance support, yeah, there's some really good things. And so what I'll do is put all this into a document. It won't have your names on it. It'll just say all of your comments so we can see what people are learning and maybe we can learn from them as well. In terms of choice boards, we'll talk about that today as well. So I'd like to start with something positive. And so I've been really enjoying talking to teachers about what's working. Because there's a lot of things not working and it's a little overwhelming these days and we get, zoomed out. But it's a great tool. It's so interesting now in meetings, people automatically come on camera when they didn't used to. And it's a very interesting shift. And how can we make the most of this shift? But I really wanted to honor what's already working for you all. As I said, and Joe said, these resources will be sent after the webinar. You'll get the PowerPoint, you'll get all the links, you'll get some templates, some tools, and you'll get all these notes from the chat box as well. And then I know Joe's recording it, so it'll be posted on the Maine Department of Ed webpage, and he'll talk to you a little bit about that at the end. He's still trying to figure out the right spacing for it. Another chat box activity, since we started with dogs, thank you, Joe. Tell me where you're at. Are you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? For this particular time, right? So I said yesterday I was a 4. Today I might be a 2 or a 3, depending on the hour, maybe the minute. So where are you all at? 2s, 3s? Ooh, a 5. Ooh, good 5s. It's because it's Thursday. All across the board. And so these types of activities, and keep going, these types of activities are ways just to quick check-ins, and I'll give you some links about where you can find these types. I have a Yoda one, and then there's one with all these emojis on it, and kids can circle where they're at, and you can see where they're at in terms of how they're feeling, and it's got like 30 emojis on it. It's just different ways. This is the most important thing to do these days is to check in. And safe ways to check in, like it's puppies, and trying to figure out, how you feel, and, not forcing anybody to have conversations, but just kind of just doing a pulse check. And I think we need to put this at the forefront of any teaching that we're doing, no matter what. Parent conversations, staff meetings, everything needs to start with where are you at, how you feeling. And it's really important. You all a lot of you sent in questions, and that kind of framed this presentation. I did the best I could. A lot of it, though, on those questions was about SEL, and so we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of framing the work moving forward. I'm not going to be able to answer all of them, but I'll do my best to give you resources for some of those other questions that maybe don't get answered as we move forward with this presentation, as well as the ones that you put in the chat box. So thank you. This is the agenda. Welcome. And then I'll talk to you a little about where Minding the Gap came from. We'll dig deeper into what that means and the process that I put together to engage in work and being thoughtful and reflective about how to mind that gap. We'll debrief and we'll talk about next steps and share some more resources. Always important to have protocol for interaction. Just putting it right out there in terms of what our expectations are and what our goals are with each other. So it's hard. We're, as I said, all zoomed out for some time being, but just to be present and participate, assume good intent, listen. I know you're all on mute, which is hard for me, but it's the way to do it with a lot of people. We have 100 people, and it's hard to get conversations going. So we've tried to use the chat box. But listen to understand, be open to new ideas. Actually, a lot of this is just good practice. It's things you already do. You do amazing things. It's just to step back and be a little bit more reflective to see what's best going to work with these kids and filling these gaps. Be open to working outside your comfort zone. Take some time to reflect. We don't do that enough. We really don't do that enough in education. We don't have time. So maybe, trying to take some time to reflect on these ideas, and you'll have the tools and resources to use for that. We are keeping you muted, and then we will use the chat box throughout all of this. So talking about the chat box, jot in the chat box. what are your biggest concerns for returning in 2021? We don't know what that's going to look like. It's a huge concern. Like what, I don't know what we're going to do, but overall, what going back to school one way or another, however we're going back, what are your biggest concerns for 2021? The unknown, the health, overcoming academic gaps. These are great. Thank you for being honest. What did kids miss? Getting to know the students, like how do you collaborate and how do you build a community, a sense of community. Motivating, health and safety. Getting food to kids and getting information to kids and getting, there's going to be a balance. Maybe kids won't come, and how do we still access those kids? Catching up on where students are at, teaching remotely. How to make sure I'm doing what the kids need, health and safety. Yeah. Reliable internet connectivity, that's a real issue as well. How to make science engaging without hands-on component. I mean, we found that there's actually some links in here for some of that. I'll let you know, but it's still hard. That's a hard one. And mental health. These are great. I'm going to put these all in a document as well, so I'll capture them, and then you can see them if they're, if you're, feeling like you need to look at what other people are concerned about. It might make you feel better too that everybody's concerned about those things, but they will also be used by MDE to see what concerns are and how we can build supports to support you in coming back in 2020, 2021. So thank you for being honest and sharing. Move this over here. Okay. So I don't pretend that I or we should never say that we have the answers, all the answers. We don't, particularly in these times. But the questions are certainly worth thinking about. And I appreciate all of you that sent in questions, and I try to use that and build the presentation around some of those questions. I'm not one to build something without getting feedback from participants ahead of time. So it's just kind of how I taught as well. What do you know? What do you want? What do you need? And so I'm going to try to address some of those questions, as well as you're going to have questions as we go forward. We'll do our best, but I don't have all the answers. I can find resources and do certain things, but I don't like the word expert for anybody, because you're not truly an expert. I'm just giving you my lived experiences, what I've done, what I've learned from, and putting it together in some type of cohesive format to try to help and reach a need that you all have. This is a Wordle. So I don't know if you've ever used word clouds. There's a couple different word cloud things you can do on the internet. And what you can do is you can take an entire piece of text. It could be a book, it could be an essay, it could be anything. You dump it into this Wordle, and what it does is it makes it into a word cloud. And the bigger the word, the more often it is in the text. And so what I did for this one is I put all of your questions. I took all the text from all the questions that you asked when you registered, and this is what came up. And so the biggest words are students and learning, and I think that's very interesting that that's at the center. It's at the heart of what you do, students and learning, and that's what we want to know more about. We want to know how to help students and how to help them learn. You have other pieces on here too: work, assess, standards, content, accurately, engage. So there's a lot of different words that were brought up in the questions that you asked, but I like to do this because then I like to see the initial kind of what was the common thread, and then that would be students and learning. And I think that's really important, and I think those are the things that we need to think about as we go through this presentation. Our goals: we're going to explore strategies to make the return to school manageable and meaningful. Those are my words. I use that all the time when I talked about social studies. It's like, how do we let go of things? How do we really make this manageable and meaningful for us and for our students? So it's not overwhelming. Things seem a little taxing and overwhelming these days. So I'm trying to give you some tools and resources to make it a little less overwhelming. Understand how to clearly identify the non-negotiables for your grade or course. Review strategies to identify prior learning needs. We've talked about prior learning a lot. We've learned about it as educators, but I'm putting it in a different context here. Examine strategies to build pre-assessments to be able to prioritize. and discuss how to adjust learning plans to ensure all students are engaged in meaningful learning experiences. These are our goals in an hour. So I'm just going to give you some nuggets to work from, and then, like I said, this is just the beginning, and we can talk further about resources as you need them. Our question of focus for the day, for this hour, is how do we use reflective practice strategies to meet the needs of all Maine students? And so that's what I said before. This isn't new, right? Reflective practice is what we should be doing. We don't obviously have a lot of time for it, but that's what we should be doing. So I just want to remind you where this work comes from. And if you've ever done PLCs or you've read DeFore's work, you recognize these questions. These are common questions you should be asking yourself all the time, either as a team or individually. What do you want students to know and be able to do? All students. How will you know they learned it? That's your assessment piece. How will you get them there? That's your instruction curriculum planning. And then those last two, how we respond when they don't learn, or how, particularly now, if they aren't showing up for virtual learning and so on, how do we get to that gap? But then also, how do we extend learning opportunities? So these are at the heart of our practice as educators to begin with. And I think this is just at the heart of really that minding the gap piece, is continually asking and reflecting back on these questions. So I wanted to remind you that this isn't new, but that this is something that we do as reflective practice as educators. I've just framed it into a little bit more focused approach to minding this gap. We know about the summer slide in terms of students retaining information, but then we added a couple months to that summer slide. What does that mean? And how does that work? So we're going to try to give you strategies. The work that I put together here is coming from a couple different places. One is coming from what I did in my classroom. Because we always have gaps. We always have kids in different areas and different needs and different backgrounds and different contexts. And so there are, in a way, always gaps. Not like this, but there are always gaps. So I try to look at strategies of how I tried to mind the gaps prior, as well as looking at the work that I do around standards. When a state or a district start implementing a new set of standards, there are gaps. And so similar strategies that we use to help teachers kind of move forward and accelerate learning at the same time as implementing new standards is some of where this work comes from. This is the process these are the steps in terms of minding that gap. The biggest, most important piece is identifying your why. We need to step back. We don't do that enough. Why do I do what I do? What's the importance to me? What's the importance to the students? Why is this important? And really kind of honing in and grounding everything on your why. And based off of that, then we talk about clarifying non-negotiables, identifying prior learning needs, identifying resources, creating pre-assessments, conducting pre-assessments and analyzing them, and then from that, creating shared and individualized learning plans. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This is the process that I'm suggesting is one piece or one strategy to help you think through how to mind those gaps and try to make it manageable. One of my favorites, he who has a why can endure any how. And I think we get in the how all the time and it gets overwhelming and complicated, but we need to step back and breathe and understand our why. And that's so important in education, to continually reflect on what our why is. So that's why I make it the first step, just to really reflect. Oh, also, when you get the PowerPoint, this picture also links to a video of it's a comedian that's talking to somebody in the audience about, he asked him to sing Amazing Grace and just sing it. So he sings it. And then he gives him he's like, you're in a prison trying to motivate the prisoners there. And so he sings it in this whole different way. He had a different why, he had a context. And I think that just reminds us of what we need to do and how we can look at things, and that we do need to step back and use maybe the summer and some time to be reflective and understand our why. Asking these questions: what do we do? How do we do it? For whom do we do it? And why do we do it? What's our value in terms of what are we bringing to the table? So I think we always need to step back and do that. That's at the core. This you'll get a template for, and this is really the whole circle. These are the questions that I had in the process. I just tried to make it into a template, and this is what we're going to walk through today. I'll talk about each of these pieces, and then I'll give an example, and it's going to be a social studies example. Sorry, just easier to manage right at this moment, but you'll be able to see how this works and how we're working through it, but you'll definitely get this template. As all of you reminded me in terms of your questions and the types of questions you asked, we need to remember that classroom environment is key. Social emotional learning is key. And there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of really good work and people have been doing it, but I feel like it's over here. It's never kind of complementing our work. I mean, there's pieces that we obviously do with classroom environment, classroom rules and so on, but there's so much. We have competencies in SEL. You have competencies in SEL. We have all these different pieces, but we're just trying to get through our curriculum and our stuff that it's hard to figure out how to do this and take time to do this. But it's more important now than ever to do this. So I built it into this work to make sure that you're continually doing social emotional learning work with your kids all the time. So I built it in terms of the top of the template. So the unit that I'm going to choose would be a high school unit on the Constitution. And the one in parentheses underneath it is something that they should have learned, let's say in eighth grade US history. They should have learned about the American Revolution Foundation's events, ideologies. And let's say they're coming now at some point, whether it be whatever grade in high school it is, you talk about the Constitution, they should have learned about American Revolution, but they may have missed it. It may have been their last unit in eighth grade, and then that's when this hit and they didn't get online learning and so on. So this is my gap. They need the foundation pieces in order to better understand the Constitution itself. And so what I do is I take an area of focus, so self-awareness. So you have different competencies in Maine, and one of them is self-awareness. So what I did in my units when I was teaching is every unit I'd focus on a self-awareness, different strategies, and ask them different questions for that competency. And then I take another competency, maybe for the next unit, or you could do it as a quarter, or you could do it as a semester. But just so it's at the forefront of your planning is that you're thinking about strategies and ideas about self-awareness or SEL. These right here give you a ton of different good resources to think about. It's not overwhelming. They're just really clear check-ins, like the dog check-in in the beginning. That is an SEL strategy, just to do check-ins, and it's so much more important now than it ever has been. For mental health and for trauma and all these different pieces, if you put it into your template and you put it as a focus, it's going to happen, and then you'll be continually doing that and setting up a routine, and kids will be engaged. So the first step is you can do this by unit. You could do this however, you could do it by your course. You could do it in different ways. I just chose to do it by unit. Then you clarify your non-negotiables. I know some of you asked about prioritizing standards or those types of things. Technically, really, all standards are important most of the time. That's why they're standards, they're the baseline. But how can you turn that into non-negotiables? And a lot of times, like I would say, non-negotiables are the mathematical practices, the science and engineering practices. The frame of your standards is what all kids need to know, be able to do by the end of a whole series of K-12 experiences in a content area. That big frame is what you focus on as your non-negotiables. What are the non-negotiables they need to that you want them to get as a result of your course? And so clarifying that is, what are the most important big ideas? So that's just really the big ideas, the framework. Could be the anchor standards needed to engage with, that your students need to engage with. Review the structures of your standards. You all have different structures. Social studies has a structure. They may not all be the same, but you have key components that's where you step back and think about, how are those non-negotiables and how can I use those to make curricular decisions? So for this activity, right, so I'm doing the Constitution unit. This is my regular unit. My high school unit is the Constitution, but I need to know what they know about the Revolution. So I'm going to step back, and in my course, whether it be a government or US history course in high school, these are my non-negotiables. These come right from the standards document, right? I want them to be clear and effective communicators, self-directed lifelong learners, creative and practical problem solvers. I want them to be responsible, involved citizens. Oops, sorry. I want them to be an integrative and informed thinker. And then on the bottom are these key areas, big topics, big ideas that I want them to engage with as part of this course that I'm teaching. But this is the big picture. This is the non-negotiables, but this literally comes right from your standards document. This is my purpose. This is why they're working on this unit on the Constitution. And so then I try to tie it back to these non-negotiables, but this grounds it. So every social studies course that I teach, no matter what it is, this is my purpose. These are the non-negotiables. They're the same, but I'm working towards the same common goal. So the next step then, once you have your non-negotiables, that should be the lens that you reflect on all the time. Any curricular decisions, anything that you're making, if this is your purpose, this is what you want, always reflect back on those. So the next step, particularly for the minding the gap work, is to identify prior knowledge. And so you need to just be thoughtful about, if these are my non-negotiables, this is my kind of unit that I'm working with right now, or this is my semester, or this is my course, and these are non-negotiables, then I need to think about, what is it that these kids need to know and be able to do in order to successfully engage in my expectations, in my curriculum? And that's where that gap is going to be happening right now, is that they may not have gotten some of that. So how do we check that? You know, you don't have to reteach the last 3 units of 5th grade US history before yours necessarily. You need to get data and figure out what the kids are actually coming in with. They may have done some activity. They may have gotten some learning. You need to know that. And that's where this prior knowledge and the pre-assessments are key in this process. So this is just the research behind prior knowledge and why it's so important. And we need to better understand what our students are coming with and what they need to come with in order to engage in the key concepts and skills and things that you are focusing on in your particular grade or course. So prior knowledge is, you know, what is it and students need to know and be able to do, the concepts, the skills. You can grab those really right from either the year before you as the standards, but some of your standards are grade banded, so you can just unpack the indicators and expectations, performance expectations, and look at some verbiage to really identify and be thoughtful about what is it, what are the key concepts and skills that they need to have engaged in prior to studying anything that I'm covering or that I'm going to go through this semester or this year. So it's really important to kind of step back and think about, what do they need to know and be able to do prior to engaging in any of this study. And that's one way, obviously, is to look at the standards. That's what we just talked about. Just asking questions, knowledge, skills, dispositions, strategy, like what is it that they really need to know in order to do that. So I did that in terms of, what did they need to know about the Revolution in order to have informed conversations about the Constitution. So the Revolution should have happened prior learning, and the Constitution is what I'm studying now. So they need to know all these different things. Just brainstorm different ideas. I looked at the standards, I looked at different things and put some specific pieces in there. And I put, these are the skills that they need to do, these are the concepts, and this is what they need to be successful at prior to engaging in any conversation about the Constitution. So this is kind of just, it was just brainstorming and looking at standards and trying to figure out pieces, even looking at some of the curriculum frameworks that are out there and trying to grab some ideas about content and concepts and skills that they would need in order to have a thoughtful engagement about the Constitution. And then this seems like a random piece, but it's really important. So what I put as the next step, and I'm finding that we're getting bombarded with resources these days. It's good and bad, but I wanted a way to capture them and connect them to something. So what I did was, or what I'm asking, and what I've worked with teachers on is, you see these kind of prior learning needs and skills. I sift through my resources then and connect them to those prior learning needs. Then I'll tell you why later, but then you have a toolkit that if a student doesn't know this and all the rest of the students do, then you have resources to give them to go and kind of come up and accelerate their learning to be at the same level as some of the other students. So that's why I have resources here, because they should be directly connected to the prior learning that you put prior or before this. So what I did is I looked at some resources out there around the prior learning pieces. I'm just going to go back. Mercantilism, monetary reserves, the French and Indian War, Ben Franklin and his contributions. And I found some online resources. So I split resources into like text or things that you could hand out so that if they don't have technology, they can kind of look at these. And then online, which are purely online, because we know there's discrepancies in how they can access what they can access. So I put just one online resource here and a couple different resources here that were hard copy. They're PDFs that I could print out and give to students if there are gaps. So these resources are to help them reach those gaps and mind those gaps. And then the next piece, and I I don't want to say, it was probably 7 years into teaching when my aha came that pre-assessments was my lifeline. So I spent more time doing pre-assessments because what it did is it gave me the opportunity to see what kids were coming in with and make curricular decisions. Like all these kids, like 80% of my kids knew, let's say, knew who Martin Luther King was and knew kind of the ideas and so on, but they needed to go deeper. So I could tell that from the pre-assessment. So I know I needed to go deeper. 90% of my kids didn't know what a social contract was. So I need to do some whole group learning on that, but I could let go of some other things. So pre-assessments are, I think, even more important than end of course assessments, end of unit assessments, because it really helps you as a teacher better understand what each student is coming into the table with, and really help you mine those gaps. It gives you the data you need. So here's a ton of different strategies. It doesn't have to be, so mine was for civics, my civics course. I had a 40 question multiple choice test that I gave them the second day. And so there were like 5 questions for each unit that were in there. So I could get a sense of what I needed to focus on, what they came in with. It's the same strategy you can use for minding the gap. You now identified the prior learning that is needed. You could build pre-assessments that have questions about that. So you could know exactly what they're coming in with, or even their misconceptions, because we know they come with a lot of misconceptions. So this whole list is different strategies that you can use. It doesn't have to be a quiz. It could be a mind map. It could be a Venn diagram. It could be anything where you can see what they're coming to the table with. And this is a really key strategy in helping you mind that gap and really make it manageable, right? So it gives you the data you need that 80% of your class knows this, 20 doesn't. So then I can share resources with that 20%, but I don't have to do the whole class instruction on that. And I can kind of move on to focusing on the Constitution because they have a lot of knowledge on the Revolution, for instance. And this is one strategy that I saw particularly for high school, that if you wanted to do a pre-assessment, you could do it according to Bloom's taxonomy. So this is just different types of questions that you could ask if you wanted to kind of frame different questions. It was just one strategy that I had seen. But the pre-assessment that I chose to use for this particular unit, okay, for high school, is to ask students to create a mind map outlining what they know about the American Revolution. I just wanted to see it. I just want to have them write it, and I can look at them, and then I can see, go back to my prior learning. Oh yeah, they do get this. Oh no, they don't. Oh, how they have this. Oh, half the class knows this. Visually, I can just see it across the board, and it might be different, particularly in high school or even in middle school, hour to hour, right? But we need to be flexible with that, and really to make it meaningful for students, we need to honor what they're coming to the table with. And that's where the minding the gap piece really works. It's taking those prior learning that you think they need in order to engage in the ideas and really understanding what they're coming to the table with, and then building the pre-assessment around that. And then that will help you make your curriculum decisions. If you may have to go over some of the ideas that they would have gotten these last 2 months, but you may not. They may have done a lot of work. We just don't know. And that this is a really strong way of finding out what kids are coming to the table with or not. And then based off of that, you create your learning experiences. So I like to call them shared and individualized learning experiences, which is the best way. So let's say you look at your pre-assessment data and 75% of the kids really understand a concept. You might have to do a little bit more individualized learning for that 25% to catch them up. But you don't have to do shared learning experiences around it. But let's say 10% of your kids understand it and 90% of your kids don't. You're going to have to go deeper. You're going to have to pick that concept or content area or idea because it's critical to understand the next step. It's really important then to create shared learning experiences so kids can kind of work on this together and unpack it together. This is because there were some questions on online tools. I just put some links in here about how can you have shared learning experiences with online tools. So these are some tools that you could have collaborative conversations. Kids can build things together. These are just samples of how do you build shared learning experiences and what kind of tools are there to do that. And then I know somebody earlier brought up choice boards, and I know there was a webinar on choice boards. So individual learning experiences. So what happens when you have 5% 5% of your kids that don't know one of the prior learning pieces. You know, are you going to do it all with your entire class and just kind of do coverage? Or do you want to give those individuals like a deeper learning experience while you can kind of continue with your content and skills and building ideas and looking at concepts with the entire class? So what we've learned from what's been going on in the current day is that there's some really good resources to individualize, right? So choice boards, the Hawaii choice boards are a great resource. They have middle school and high school ones, and they did them every week since we've closed. So they have resources on there almost every day, every week, around all content areas. So you'll be able to go to that link. They're already out there. They're for public consumption. And you can take some of those and say, hey, you don't know social contract? Here's something to read, or here's an activity you can do to bring you up to speed in terms of helping us all be on the same page so we can move forward and talk more about the Constitution. I know I heard at the last webinar that PBS has done this here too in Maine, but in Kansas, what they do is they have the PBS stations worked with the Department of Education and have time frames. So early in the morning, they do elementary programming, the middle school programming, high school programming. They've stopped all their other programming. And then they have these videos and the programming all connected back to the standards of things that students should be learning right now, and have videos and movies and activities and certain types of things. So there's some really good links there that could be given to kids as well. And PBS, you know, low technology in terms of TV and or radio, they can still access it. It doesn't have to be a digital piece. And the choice boards from Hawaii have digital, like virtual pieces and just at home with no technology pieces. So they have examples for each. Investigations beyond the classroom is a science one, and that is how do you do investigations if you're not in the classroom? So that might be interesting for the person that was talking about the science piece, and so that'll be a link there. And then the sample learning menus are actually science-based as well, and it's just different activities and things that parents or students should be doing at home right now, and those things could be taken and put for an individual learning experience if there's a gap, right, for individual students. So these are strategies that are already there, that have resources already built in for you that you can use to start filling those gaps. So let's say I did my mind mapping. My kids all turned in their work, and I find that one of the skills that they needed to be able to do is draw conclusions from primary sources. And I see that they can't do that, that they don't do that, that a majority of them haven't had enough, they haven't done enough in that area. So now I need to work on that as a whole class. And the same piece, why is self-determination important? I can see that in some of these pre-assessments that I've done, and I know that the whole class really needs to work on that concept. It's a hard concept, and so even if they've grappled in it and they mention it in their mind map or do something, I still think we really need to go deep into that. So those I will do shared learning experiences. But then individual, like I don't see them talking about the colonies or any of these types of things or the colonial period in their mind map or trying to show the impact. Then I could give them one of these pieces of reading. These are readings or visuals or cartoons that they could work on to bring them up to better understanding the American Revolution and kind of bringing it to the page where we need to really focus on the Constitution. So the tools on the right can individually help students get to the spot that they need to be and mind that gap. This was a big question from everybody, and I wish I could answer all of those questions about ELs and about special ed and all those different. There's a lot going on in terms of trying to think about helping kids with autism and all the specifics. We could do daily webinars about those, and we should. But what I did for just this time, for the time being, for this kind of space, is I put some really good resources that I go to look for things and strategies and ideas to work with my kids. The beauty of this process is that you step back, you think about the prior learning, and what you can do is work with your partner teachers, the special ed teachers, the EL teachers, and say, this is the prior learning that they need to be successful in this class. Can you help me? Can you help me figure out how to help them access different types of resources and tools to get them there as close as we can? Because they're going to know how far the student can or can't go. But these are really good. They have some really good resources in terms of online learning with ELs and special ed, and how do you manage that, and how do you have conversations with parents and those types of things. So there's some good resources here. And then I have 2 slides of special ed resources. So these are high leverage practices. There's examples of high leverage practices for special education students around collaboration, assessment, social emotional behavior, and instruction. So some good meat there for you to think about as you're trying to meet the needs of all students. But I would, say meet with your other teachers. Once you understand what the prior learning is, they can help you try to figure out resources. Even your if we still have them, library media specialists can find some resources for you once you identify what those prior learning needs are. These are more, because there was a lot of questions on special ed. I put some different resources that I know I go to and different organizations that I go to for instruction and strategies. So our next steps, your next steps, is really to do it one step at a time. And really focus on being one step at a time. You can't do this all on your own. You can't do it all at once. That's why I suggested to maybe do it as a unit. I know when I did it in the classroom, I did it for a whole course, but I really did just do a multiple choice. But then I was able to say, well, out of these 5 questions, I know for unit 1, they don't understand this, but they do this. So it really helped with my instructional time. You can do the same as well, but it's where your comfort level is. But I cannot tell you how powerful pre-assessments are. So thinking about it strategically and how you can work on it together, whether you're working on it as a team, one person does unit 1, unit 2, however you want to do it. And get to the second point is you need to collaborate for sanity. We can't do this alone for many reasons right now, anytime. We can't. And so the more you can collaborate and think about those prior learning together, build pre-assessments together, I think it's really powerful. And then this last piece right here is a tool that I put together. And you'll get this in your tool. Hold on. Okay. It's just a self-reflection tool that I put together for right now, for the time being, because what happens now kids are technically getting out of school, and now we have summer. I suggest you take a break and get some sunshine and relax and breathe for a moment, and let it go. But then maybe take some time to do some reflection this summer about what worked. It goes back to that first question that I asked you earlier. We need to step back a little bit and say what worked. What do I want to continue doing? If we all come back to school, there's some things that I learned in these 2 months that I still want to do with kids. Do I want to flip a classroom? Do I want to use this technology? Those types of things. And so this tool helps you remember that. It's just jotting down, they're just questions to really getting at that question about what worked, about content, what worked about strategy, what worked about student engagement, and what didn't. So you tag it as, yes, this worked, this didn't work, and yes, I did this, and just to capture in your own head and be reflective. So that tool will be in the Google folder that you will receive. It's the content piece is social studies focused, but you can easily change it to using your own questions and from your own content areas for science and math and English language arts as well. Basing it on maybe the instructional shifts that are expected from each of your content areas, and really kind of being reflective on what's working and what's not working. So that's tool. Nope. So that's linked here, so it'll take you there, but it'll also be, you'll have a link to the Google folder when you get the PowerPoint. Another key question that you all had, a lot of you had, was what do I do for online learning? Like I am inundated, or I don't even know where to start, or I'm just kind of barely breathing and keeping my head above water, one step ahead of the kids. But here are some links based off of the questions that you asked. How do you make it online learning engaging? You all gave some really great strategies as well. How do you keep kids engaged in Zoom? It's the same issue with adults as well, as we all know. What are accommodations and interventions in remote learning? What does that look like? How do you do that remotely? I put an interesting one in there that I like, particularly for secondary classrooms, is flipping the classroom, where you give kids videos, whether PBS, TED Talks, or so on. That's their homework. That's where they kind of get the content. And then in your classroom, it's all about talking and working through these things and discussing and so on. So you're not the person giving the content, they're getting it from these snippets, but then you're engaging with it and really going deeper with it. That's what flipping the classroom is, and there's some ideas there. How to maintain a focus on equity. How do you do that in an online learning environment? And then the logic models, I think, is something interesting. It's a little nugget, but what it is, it's a paper that talks about how do you get kids to do logic models around their online learning, and how do you get, see how they're thinking and what they're planning and those types of things. So it's a little read. It's interesting, and I think it's really good for secondary folks. And then I'm going back to these tools because a suggestion would be, we barely know who we're going to get next year or how they're going to come back. So it's harder in the secondary realm to access parents, access kids, and so on. So there's a couple different ways that you could do that. You can either, on your school website, put ideas to do each week from the choice boards or from the PBS resources to make sure you're prepared for next year. As a student, or have your administration send out notices to all parents and say your kids should be, if your kids are going into 8th grade, these are some things that they should look at over the summer. We know it's hit or miss, but at least we're suggesting some things that they could work on over the summer, and these are really good pieces to get resources from for each of the content areas in order to do that. The daily dues are science focused, but it's a good structure to see. Maybe you could do it with ELA or math or social studies and really kind of have daily dues. It's a lot, but you could maybe do weekly dues, something like that, where you're showing due diligence in giving kids resources and parents resources for the summer to come back prepared, knowing that, again, it's hit or miss. But those are some different strategies that could be used in terms of some summer work for kids. If you don't have summer school and so on, or any other type of learning activities, these may be opportunities to do that, and structures and strategies to do that. That is what I have for you, and you will get all this information. I hope it was helpful. There's a lot in a short period of time, but I'm trying to kind of give you a structure to work from, and some tools and resources to do it, and some steps and an example to get through. Sorry, I'm driving you crazy, right? To get through this and use this as a planning tool. You can do it however you want. I just wanted to give you things to remember. It shouldn't be real new, but it should be just hopefully thought-provoking in terms of working through this. I do suggest, like, you all have your own unit planning templates or however you do it, in the little red book in every box. I would say, like, this is the top now. This should be the top of before you plan your unit. Here's my unit on the Constitution. Let me think about these things, and then I'll go into unit planning for the regular Constitution unit. But I need to know these things and focus on these things prior to me getting into the Constitution information with my students. So this would be like an additional little top part of any lesson planning that you're already doing for your regular programming. That's the presentation today. I hope it was useful. I hope it was helpful. I hope you got some nuggets to work from. I know I will capture the chat. And what I did for the elementary one is I put all the things that I asked you in the chat box in certain documents, so you can see all of those as well. And then you'll get this PowerPoint and the templates and all the other fun things that we talked about. And the PowerPoint, again, remember, has links. So use it. That's what it's for. Everything, and change it. Do whatever you think that makes sense to you. It's all you, Joe.
It was just, if you check in the chat box in about 5 seconds, you'll see your form to get your contact hour. So I'm putting that in now. They'll ask you some questions. After you hit submit, please note that there's a link to a fillable PDF for you to put in the session title, your name, and the date. I was thinking, Beth, after you got going, I was looking at the time, I was like, how did we start so much earlier this time? And I realized it's because this time I didn't gush over how amazingly wonderful you are and how lucky I am to I was like, well, I missed that in the introduction. That I think in the elementary session, I said, Beth is probably one of the smartest people I know. And I didn't want to put all that pressure on, but I hope everybody can see the session and agree that she's a fantastic colleague, friend. She's really amazing. So this time I didn't gush ahead of time, so I figured I would gush at the end after seeing all that again.
I just try to be practical. That's about it. We don't get enough. We don't get enough practical in education. We get a lot of theory and all that other additional stuff.
I mean, I think it's that part, right? You have that position where you get to think about things like this. And I oftentimes, like, my position, guys, ask me the questions. I get to think about this, right? I'm not involved in some of those other works. So
those kids and parents that come in,
right,
that everybody else has to deal with.
So I was keeping an eye. I did not see any questions or anything pop up during the chat. I know that we had pre-caught those questions.
Yep.
But since we're at the time, so I guess I will just formally thank you for the again for your time, second time again. We'll collect all those resources, everybody. Let me give you guys the links where you can find everything. If all of my webinars and videos and everything, I put on my professional learning page. So what you'll do as soon as I get the video processed and then the resources from Beth, I already have a holding spot for her 2 sessions. They'll go up there, it'll be the video, and then it'll be those related resources right there with you. Beth made the promise to the elementary group, and then I heard a little bit in today, I'm gonna go through the registration and email it to everybody as well. So just whatever email you used when registering, I'll just do a mass mailing. If I can get it all linked in, I'll have to see exactly what we have and what that looks like, but I'll try to get that information out to the email. But I definitely really stress, if there's anything I've hosted or letter facilitated, all of that is on that professional learning page. And I did do a quick count earlier. I was working on something. It is, Beth, this is number 68. There are now 68 separate presentations on that page for you guys to go ahead and work with. So, and this might be the best, Beth, who knows?
Yeah.